Okay, so I want to thank you all for coming today. Welcome to the inaugural Sector Speakers Series with Dr. Chandra Alexandra, speaking about the CFRE exam and a career in nonprofit fundraising and development. This program was created by the California Green Academy, whose mission is to promote systems thinking and the triple bottom line in business, energy, and transport. We're very excited to have as a partner in this series the University of San Francisco's Masters of Nonprofit Administration program, which just celebrated its 35th anniversary last month, having been the first graduate nonprofit management program in the nation. A little housekeeping: we'll be muting all attendees so that everyone may enjoy the webinar. If you have a question for myself or Dr. Alexander, please place them in the chat feature located at the bottom right of your screen. You can also send any comments to the email address sss@calgreenacademy.org. Again, that's sss@calgreenacademy.org. We also have our direct message for Twitter. That's @calgreen_SSS. Again, @calgreen_SSS. So my name is Greg Justice. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer, another name for the CEO or ED of the California Green Academy. Dr. Chandra Alexandre is a seasoned development professional and certified fundraising executive with over 15 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. In her current role, at the Global Fund for Women, she is responsible for leading efforts toward a $25 million budget by 2020. Previously, Dr. Alexander was a fundraising leader at Partners in School Innovation, where she doubled the organization's budget in less than 2 years. She later built out her department to include marketing, communications, and research functions, also leading strategic initiatives, facilitating national scale and growing revenue significantly, and furthering educational reform efforts in new geographies. As Vice President of the Bay Area Council Foundation, Dr. Alexander managed a multitude of programs. In 2011, she led fundraising for Secretary Hillary Clinton's Women and the Economy Summit, raising more than $1.2 million in 8 months from a variety of sponsors for successful and high-profile international convening. Notably, she galvanized community around the diplomatic event, partnering with local nonprofits and universities, bringing the voices and experiences of women to the conversation. Before her transition to the nonprofit sector, Dr. Alexander was in private banking and served in the U.S. Diplomatic Service posted in Switzerland. Her commitment to the rights of women and girls runs deep. She has served as a board member of the International Museum of Women, the Red Web Foundation, and the Women's Building. Dr. Alexander earned an AB at Columbia, an MBA in Sustainable Management at Presidio Graduate School, and a PhD in Asian and Comparative Studies from the California Institute of Integral Studies. She is a home birth advocate and a lover of Sanskrit. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alexander.
Greg, thank you so much, and thank you for those of you who are on this webinar this morning. Greg, I'm just confirming people can see me. I know that we don't have interactive video, but I just want to make sure that I am visible to folks.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Great, hi everyone. So I'm delighted to be with you today. I'm really excited about this conversation, and I would say maybe as a starting place, given that wonderful introduction, it would be helpful for me to know, and maybe you can just write this in the comments, why is it that you're interested in this webinar, and or what is your connection to fundraising? What connects you into this work? The CFRE is a very specific exam. Greg alluded to the fact that I do have a CFRE credential, and I obtained that in 2016 for a long time, many, many years, feeling as though it wasn't very important. And I'll talk a little bit more about why I decided to get the credential and why I do think it's an important certification for fundraisers today. But if you could share with me, again, via the chat, and I'll take a look at those comments, what is it about fundraising that connects you into this work, and what specifically interests you about the CFRE? In the webinar today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the CFRE is. I am going to go through some of the points of what's involved, address why take it, and if you get it, then what? Sort of some of those considerations. I'll take you through some of the steps and components, and then I actually want to give you a feel for the exam by doing and sharing some practice questions with you. So we'll talk through those, but I think it will be a fun way to give you a sense of what the exam covers in practice or in application. So let me just start with what is it? So Certified Fundraising Executive, the CFRE, actually consists of two parts. It's an application process that's really designed to test your knowledge of applied fundraising acumen, how you take information about what it means to be a fundraising professional in practice and demonstrate that you know how the pieces fit together and how it works. So I'll talk a little bit about what the specific areas are. So somebody is writing, and thank you for doing so, that you're interested in learning exactly what we'll be sharing in regards to what's in the importance of it for fundraising professionals. Absolutely, we'll do that. I'll talk about that pretty soon, Karen. So in terms of the exam itself, let me just cover some of the logistics to give you an understanding. So there is an application process. You apply to be able to get through an approval process to be able to actually sit for the exam, and I'll talk about what that is. The exam then itself is really the focus for many, many people. And it in fact is a very long exam. It's about 200, well not about, it is 200 multiple choice questions, 25 of which are used to validate future exams because no two tests are alike. And it really tests mastery of the application of fundraising, as I said, sort of as a body of knowledge across 6 main areas. The 6 areas covered by the exam and areas that we cover certainly in the M&A program at USF, as well as things that I know that you're aware of vis-a-vis not just your fundraising experience, but more broadly your nonprofit experience and the ways in which growing a contributed income base for your organization is important. So the first area is current and prospective donor research. The second is on how you actually secure gifts from the variety of sources that you may have access to. How you build relationships, and we know that in fundraising, relationship building trust is of key and critical importance. So a good portion of the exam focuses on that. There's a whole section on volunteer involvement, and volunteer involvement, of course, is important not just for the kinds of volunteers we think about, for example, if we're Habitat for Humanity and we want to build a house using volunteer labor, but we think about in every nonprofit organization when we're looking at growing a board of directors, as an example, or a committee for leadership or finance or a campaign. I think another important piece that alludes to or sort of segues nicely into is probably a better way of putting it is leadership and management in nonprofit organizations. And then finally, and I think this is often underemphasized, but the final part of the exam is an incredibly important piece to me personally as a fundraising professional and to, I think, the sector, and that is ethics, accountability, and professionalism. So Greg, I see you're writing here. It's important to understand why the CFRE is important, how it impacts others, the ability to do their job. And if working with or for these people, must know what's needed for them to do their job well. So yes, I think understanding if you are on the fundraising team or you're managing fundraisers and or if you're an executive director of an organization, helping you understand what's key and critical in the fundraising role and what we can appropriately expect from individuals who are professional fundraisers. So I think maybe I'll just quickly go to Karen's question about why it's important for fundraising professionals. And when I opened and I said, you know, for many years as a fundraiser, I didn't think it was important. And I didn't think it was important because it didn't seem to have the kind of cachet or credibility the way, for example, in the financial sector, a CPA might be recognized or a CPA certification might be required for position. If you think about that particular degree, a certified professional accountant, it's something that says to you, this is an individual who has passed a high bar or threshold to demonstrate their knowledge of finance, their understanding of the rules and regulations regarding finance, and their ability to apply that within a business or within an organization. And so, of course, it makes sense if we're looking for a contract or we're looking for an employee that that might be a value add that's easily demonstrable. through the individual having a CPA. They've passed a test. So, why take it? And then I'll talk a little bit about my journey to actually taking the exam. I do think that, and I am an advocate of the CFRE now, because there is in a way my desire to have the professionalization of fundraising be top of mind in the nonprofit sector. I would say that I think we do ourselves a disservice when we think of fundraisers as a sort of a necessary evil. And that is often the way that fundraising is viewed in many nonprofit organizations. And it's very, very unfortunate. And I say a necessary evil often because board members are afraid of asking for gifts. And even an executive director may feel as though while they understand the importance and potentially the complexity of fundraising, it's not something that they feel they themselves need to step up to. When, of course, when we think about how important a culture of philanthropy is in a nonprofit organization, we know that an executive director not on board and board members not on board around fundraising or professional fund development, we know how seriously challenging that can be for the organization. So why take it? I do think that there is this level of professionalism that I am, again, an advocate for, to be able to say that as a CFRE, I hold a certain standard, I represent a kind of professionalism, that it's not about passing a multiple choice test, frankly. It's about truly being able to leverage the body of knowledge that the CFRE tests on within the sector, and to know, for example, ethics, accountability are important considerations, and we can be relied on as experts with a knowledge base to be able to bring our wisdom and our training to the table when organizations are struggling with difficult questions about donor relationships, about whether or not to accept a gift, about determining a gift acceptance policy, or thinking about even an investment policy in an organization. That those questions of professionalism can be turned to an individual with a CFRE on the fundraising team, a fundraising leader, and say, well, what do you think? Because I trust you. So there's something in that about credibility. There's something in that about truly being a representative of really solid nonprofit leadership. Accountability in terms of your own ability to be a good steward of donors' investments and trust in the organization, and the way that you're actually, I would say, sort of a bridge between the beneficiaries of your nonprofit organization and the leadership and board of that organization. There's something about turning to a CDO, a chief development officer, a development director, somebody who has this credential to be able to know and trust their knowledge base in practice. I would say for me that the turning point really came in terms of my thinking about this as I started getting more involved in the Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP. And I joined the board of the local chapter of AFP, and I started thinking about who I was as a professional fundraiser. Having somewhat fallen into this career with a background in finance and operations, but seeing the true need for fundraising, I started doing fundraising largely as a grant writer. And my profession grew from there, my career grew from there, I should say. And really seeing sort of who was sitting around the table, the kinds of engagements and interactions I'd had across the nonprofit sector, both as an employee and as a consultant, I started to realize that more and more I was seeing the challenges that people in the role of fundraiser were having, communicating, helping people understand their expertise, and I decided that I was going to be an advocate. And I can think of no better way to be a strong advocate truly than to be able to say that I speak as a certified fundraising executive, as somebody who has been through this process and has been validated by the profession itself. So alignment with AFP, again, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and having taken this exam was a way for me to deepen my own advocacy efforts. I also think that there's an element of personal fulfillment that comes with having achieved the certification. And certainly as one deepens into, and if one is somebody who believes in lifelong learning, and if you're committed to this sector, then of course you cannot be in the sector without doing fundraising or being connected to fundraising in some way. Whether that's a board member, again, an executive director, a staff member, fundraising is key to the success of every nonprofit organization. And so I think, as you consider your role, it really is important to think about what are you bringing to the profession? How can you help people understand the key relationships that we have between the needs and the dignity of our beneficiaries and the needs and dignity of those who are wanting to fulfill their passion in something that aligns with the mission of your nonprofit organization. I think as sort of minor points, I would say, why take the CFRE? Well, maybe career potential. You know, increasingly, if you look on job advertising boards, you can certainly search for CFRE as a requirement of certain positions. It's not incredibly common, but in some parts of the nonprofit sector it is. It's increasingly common in higher ed and in larger hospital organizations, nonprofit organizations. But I do think it's part of the peer recognition that you get, and if you involve yourself in the sector and you involve yourself in fundraising somehow with continuing education and learning, as I was mentioning, the idea of continuing to grow and deepen your knowledge base, taking classes, it's something that's looked upon as, well, favorably, I guess is the simple way to say it. It's really looked upon favorably. Attending conferences and so on and having a CFRE says to people, oh, we get it. You've done your homework. You're committed to this work. You're an advocate. You're an ambassador for what it means to be a fundraiser, not in the fundraising is evil, but actually somebody who's willing to step up and truly be fully someone who owns the profession as a profession. So I think that's really big. And I think for certain people, particularly if you're a one-person shop or you're an executive director in a small nonprofit organization, it can really help bolster, yes, certainly your self-esteem, but also the perception that your board may have of you in that role. And also, as a one-person shop, I've also heard people who are in that position say that getting a CFRE really validated them, that it took them from feeling like, you know, I've been doing this work for 5-10 years. It's a way for me to really show to myself that I've learned something, that I've mastered something, that I'm not where I started, you know, when I just thought, in my case, for example, that grant writing was the way to get extra money into the organization, that there's a lot more at stake here. And again, when I was talking about the exam, I mentioned some of the key components that go beyond what you think of as traditional fundraising and really into leadership and ethics and management and, you know, true volunteer involvement and how to, you know, sort of retain, engage with board members in ways that are going to be really meaningful to the organization. So I'm just going to pause and see if Karen or Greg, given, thank you for posting that you posted some of your initial queries, if you wanted to write and let me know if there's anything that I touched on. Greg, I don't know if you want to open up the microphone, but it's really helpful to have a bit of a conversation, although I'm happy to keep going as well. So if you want to write and let me know if I've missed a point or there's something you'd like to have me go a little bit more deeply into, I will do that. And as that's getting teed up, I will, and Greg, let me know about the microphones also, if we can open it up since it's a small group here. I will also then just quickly go into maybe some of the logistics of the exam. So Greg?
Yeah, microphones are open, so if any of you want to ask a question, feel free to go ahead. I had a quick question as well.
Yeah.
Well, first I wanted to state the reason why we immediately decided on having you speak for the inaugural one is there is a, not sobering, but there is a statistic about 70% of the nonprofits' activities are fundraising. So with that, we decided, okay, fundraising has to be the key, the inaugural webinar. I was just curious, CFRE is advertised as being a global certification. What exactly is meant by that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it is global in the sense that CFRE.org, the administrator of this, is a global organization. Whereas the Association of Fundraising Professionals, while they have chapters in Mexico and Canada, and I believe there are different forms of AFP in Europe and elsewhere, there isn't one unified sort of standard. And so CFRE actually provides a global standard for fundraising, despite the fact that truly there are it's very true, cultural differences and different kinds of thinking about how fundraising is done. But I would say it's very representative of a baseline of standards across these categories that I've mentioned. And it also very much includes kind of the best in class from the US and the UK for sure, as kind of leaders in the fundraising field. Greg, thank you for joining. Sorry you have to go, but thank you for joining.
No, thank you very much.
So I'm going to dive a little bit into just some of the logistics. I mentioned that there's 2 parts to the CFRE. You have to be approved to actually take the exam. And so the application process is really focused on a point system. It has 4 components. You have to demonstrate professional practice. So how much time have you actually had at a fundraising seat? How long have you been doing this work? And for many people, the minimum is 5 years. You have to demonstrate competency across 5 years of full-time engagement as a fundraiser. And there are some nuances to how they count time. And so I recommend that you look at CFRE.org. They have a candidate handbook that details all of this really, really well. So I'm just going to touch on some of the highlights. The next part where they require you to demonstrate competency is around professional performance. And what that means is how much money have you actually been responsible for raising? And that could be actual direct solicitations, or that could be through communications and marketing. So if you've been involved in fundraising on a fundraising team through marketing and communications, in some of those, let's say, indirect strategies, then they have ways to count those dollars as well. And so you just have to validate. Education is another key. And I think I made this comment, but just in terms of thinking about taking the CFRE as furthering your own education and learning, I do think it's really important. It gives you a vast sense. And it certainly is an incredible supplement to the fundraising and philanthropy class at USF, I would say, that it's a really great way to continue your lifelong learning and development and your investment in the profession. So there are points for education that you have completed. So for example, even if your undergraduate degree was more than 5 years ago, of course, that still counts. They like to know what kind of credentials you bring into the certification process. And so all of those points are totaled up. Once you get to a certain total, you're able to then take the exam. I would say that in general, CFRE doesn't go through all of these with a fine-tooth comb. A lot of it is really on the honor system, but they do audit. So I just sort of flag for folks, they do actually audit applications, or a certain percentage of applications every year, just to make sure that people are getting educated in the ways that they said, and they verify employment. If you said that I was the chief fundraiser at XYZ nonprofit, they may pick up the phone and actually call them. And in terms of proof of dollars raised, they may ask you for documentation. So it's always really helpful to have in your back pocket these kinds of things when you're going through the process. And just a side note, there's another professional certification called the ACFRE, and you might think that they're kind of, the ACFRE, which stands for Advanced Certified Fundraising Executive, kind of builds off the CFRE. In some ways, in terms of content, it does, but they're actually 2 different credentials. So it's not as though if you get your ACFRE, you no longer need the CFRE. Many ACFREs actually maintain both credentials. So just to put that out there. I was actually recently in New Orleans at the Association of Fundraising Professionals International Conference. Great place to have a conference, but in any event. And I sat in on a roundtable conversation about the ACFRE because I'm considering doing it. And they definitely said, while the knowledge base is really important and the additional years of professional practice are really important, most of us do actually maintain both credentials. So in terms of the commitment to continuing education, I just wanted to really highlight that as an important piece of why you might actually go for this certification. So once you pass through the application, it's time to prepare for the exam. I don't know of any authorized online sort of test prep or anything like that. There's certainly a lot of places that advertise study guides and such, but what I found is that those study guides All they actually do is teach you test-taking techniques. And they're not really that valuable. What's most valuable is what I'm going to share with you today, which is some of the sample questions. If you can get a hold of, through online sources or your professional networks, exam questions, that is the best way to prepare. When you go on the CFRE.org website and you take a look at all of the resources, all of the books that they recommend are good reading for each of the different areas of professional practice for your knowledge base, it's overwhelming. There is no way that you could read all of that content, retain it all, and go in and take an exam and feel that you've prepared yourself well. It's just really not practical. Do I recommend the books on that list for over the course of years, deepening your knowledge? Yes, absolutely. But the idea is that you know, there are no two candidates that really come to the exam with the same knowledge base, and a lot of this is on experience. And people know that different nonprofits work different ways, but again, what they're trying to do is really capture a baseline. So I guess what I want to say is, again, the mastery of the application of this knowledge, and it's really impossible to train or teach to the exam specifically, and that's why the questions are incredibly important to, as many of them as you can get from friends or colleagues, sort of the better. So again, 200 multiple choice questions, 175 of them will count towards your overall score, and then the other 25 are being tested so that they're validated for future exams, but they don't count. When I took the CFRE, I know that the CFRE was revised in 2016. When I took it, you had to get 500 out of 800. So I think the numbers are a little different now. It seems that there are fewer questions, or maybe it's just the point system. So I'm not entirely clear on the number of questions that I actually answered, but I know that I sat for a 4-hour exam. So yes, it can take, or you have, up to 4 hours to actually complete the exam. And if it is 200 questions, it was 200 questions when I took it, it's definitely still 200 questions now. I validated that. But I think sort of how they score them, perhaps it's 2 points per question. Whatever it is, point is, it was 500 to pass. There's a percentage or a threshold of, I think, 75%. So you can probably validate that easily enough on the CFRE.org website. Actually don't remember that detail. But I do know that it's not, I'll say it this way, it's a relatively high threshold for passing. Many people who take the CFRE the first time do not pass, and that's okay. But I do recommend, you know, being thoughtful in your preparation. And again, I think a lot of it is just really trusting what you know and doing some of those sample questions like we'll be doing in just a little bit. Let's see, what else do I want to say? There are, again, incredible resources on CFRE.org. The content areas, maybe I can quickly just review again. I started out by just mentioning these, but what I'll do is just tell you how much of the exam each one of these are. So the first, again, is current and prospective donor research, and that's about 14% of the questions. Securing the gift, that's about 23%. Relationship building is 26%. Volunteer involvement is small, it's about 8%. Leadership and management is 19%. And then ethics, accountability, and professionalism is 10%. And that's where, for example, the Donor Bill of Rights comes in. And so if you're not familiar with the Donor Bill of Rights, that would be a really good foundational document to review, and also to try and more deeply understand in the context of your practice as a fundraiser or a nonprofit manager or leader. I just wanted to give you an idea before we jumped into some of the questions of, in terms of the, you know, sort of what do each of these buckets mean that I've described. For example, current and prospective donor research. Again, CFRE.org has an incredible reading list for you, but they're looking at some of the following. What are the indicators that identify trends and define the characteristics of your constituent base? Donor acquisition and retention principles. How do you use a data management system? What are the key ways in which that can be useful? donor screening, qualifying, rating methods, making sure that you understand how to translate a universe of donor prospects into actual people who are going to be giving to your organization, and how do you retain them. What are donor motivations, best practices and policies of various funding sources, so corporate engagement or other institutional donors, family foundations, private foundations, major gifts versus people who are capable of giving major gifts versus individuals giving, for example, through your annual fund or online campaigns. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea. One important point that tends to come out in these exams, ethics I would say is woven throughout. So for example, in this first part, ethics really translates to the ethical use of data. So thinking about how you're securing data, what your process is for removing donors from outreach lists, and so on. In the next one, securing the gift, again, about 23% of the overall exam. It translates to, I see, about 46 items on the actual test itself. It will talk about your understanding, or will question your understanding of the case for support, solicitation strategies and techniques that really work for different donor groups, thinking about how to prepare donor-focused solicitations and communications so that donors can make the best possible decision for engaging with your organization. And then, of course, some of this also has to focus on solicitation and whether or not you can secure the gift. So they may ask you things about the psychology of giving and what's most likely to compel donors to give. They can ask you about the elements of an effective case for support, maybe negotiation and how you would deal with a donor who said no, donor motivations or barriers to giving behavior, things like that. And you know, there are a variety of different kinds of fundraising techniques. They could ask you about direct marketing or special events or writing a proposal, getting corporate sponsors. So again, if you're a practitioner, this is really familiar to you. Certainly, again, there's going to be the uniqueness of your nonprofit and your specific way of doing it, but the questions will really be focused on what are the general guiding principles that we should know and understand to be successful as a fundraiser. The next one is relationship building. So points around initiating and strengthening relationships with your constituents. So that's really part of the fundraising cycle that we call cultivation and stewardship. So how do you build those plans out? How do you think about those as a professional fundraiser? What does your communications plan actually look like? How do you think about different kinds of communications for different kinds of donors? What does a culture of philanthropy mean in nonprofits? How can you help your constituents really understand the value of giving? What does that mean? And those constituents, again, can be internal or external. It could be communicating to your board as an important piece of insight. Acknowledging and recognizing donor gifts. And then for the volunteer involvement segment, I'm going to go through this quickly. Really identifying organizational readiness and opportunities to engage volunteers. Who's going to manage them? Is that something that the Chief Development Officer, for example, is going to have in their portfolio of work? Oftentimes it is, actually. But volunteers also meaning, again, board members, not just folks who are going to come in and be docents for the museum, or again, build a house for Habitat for Humanity, or serve other ways in the community, but really about board members and board members' engagement. Even and particularly when nonprofit organizations are thinking about campaigns, and those could be for a building, those could be for an endowment, those could be for growth capital for the organization. So volunteers come into play there pretty heavily. And what are some of the, again, ethical considerations in terms of sharing donor information with volunteers who are making thank you calls, and other ways that we might engage board members as volunteers in the organization? What is our right and responsibility as a fundraiser to ensuring that our donor information is protected? And then finally, I think finally, oh, almost finally, sort of the penultimate bucket here, leadership and management. So what kind of leadership advances fundraising? How do we think about marketing and public relations as tools to support and grow fundraising? How do we manage those processes? How do we think both short-term and long-term about our fundraising plans and the budgets that are needed to support those plans to success? how do we think about aligning those fundraising plans with our organizational strategic plan? How do we ensure that our staff, both on the development team, the fundraising team, and the broader organizational staff are supported in sort of the thinking about a culture of philanthropy in the organization, but also as support in the work of what we need to do to be successful in effectuating against that fundraising plan. That could be, for example, an event that the organization is hosting that staff are not just invited to, but are actually showing up to help support it in being successful. And then also consultants and how we think about and utilize consultants in the work. So that's just a high-level overview, but those are some of the points that the exam can touch on, and I think are really important for us as professionals to be thinking about. So again, if some of this isn't stuff that you deal with currently in your day-to-day, now you know that the scope of what's considered a fundraising professional is actually this large, and it's really important, I think, for you to be just aware of that in your own growth and development within the sector. Then the final bucket, as I mentioned earlier, is definitely a favorite of mine, and that's ethics, accountability, and professionalism. So ensuring that ethical considerations truly are part and parcel of important conversations in the organization, and how we communicate solid principles or sound principles of ethical fundraising. And I would say that we as professionals need to be sometimes, often, the arbiters of those conversations, and the people who are willing to say that, you know, the ethics is really about justifying how we come to a specific decision, and we need to be aligned internally around that justification. So if we decide not to take a gift, and in particular if it's setting a precedent in the organization, how are we talking about and how are we documenting and how are we sharing with our board so that everyone's on the same page around how that decision was made, why that decision was made, and the sort of rationale for that decision is pretty important. Implementing, monitoring, honoring donors' intent, again, somewhat going back to the Donor Bill of Rights, but really woven throughout. Instructions regarding the use of gifts and follow-through is really, really important in terms of the organization's accountability. So many different pieces within ethics, accountability, and professionalism. I've just touched on a few. But I'm going to pause to see if there are any specific questions right now. So let's see, Karen. Do I have some recommendations for job seekers in making the leap from fundraising to support to frontline fundraising? That's a really good question. That's going to help validate or apply toward the CFRE requirement of validating actual dollars raised. So I guess, Karen, I would ask you, is your motivation to be a frontline fundraiser? In that case, I think I have a response. Yeah, maybe just tell me a little bit about what you're getting at with your question. If you're there, Karen. Oh, there you go. That's okay.
Take a second to unmute.
Yep, sorry.
Thank you for asking. So yeah, I feel like a little bit what is happening in my particular career trajectory within nonprofits, and now that I'm, you know, really my emphasis in my job search is to continue developing as a development professional, and I think that you know, what I'm finding is a bit of that hurdle of transitioning from like a development associate, a development coordinator position that has been much more on the supportive end, a lot more data centric maybe, and research centric versus someone who's making the ask and you know, holding the relationships and
right.
You know, that type of cultivation.
Yeah, so if you look at CFRE.org, it does not exclude people in your position because you're actually supporting the people who are actually doing the asking, and that's absolutely fine. So I would just say in terms of the dollars, it's not really about I directly was responsible for raising this much money. What you can talk about is your role within the department, and the department has raised this much money, right? Like your contributed income is, I don't know, whatever, 2.5 million, for example. And my role within raising that money was this. And so you're able to document how you help facilitate raising that much money. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the purposes of the exam, it's great. But honestly, in terms of professional development, if you really want to do and start to transition from more back office operational fundraising to some more of, as you said, that front line, you really want to talk to your supervisor about, are there mentoring opportunities? Are there places where I can get engaged in the development, for example, of, mid-tier donors? Are there additional stewardship activities that I can be involved in that will help translate my understanding of data into practice? I would definitely focus on some of those.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just wanted to mention, and I don't think I touched on this, taking the CFRE exam is really a commitment. So we've talked a lot about areas of practice and these other pieces, but I'm saying it's a commitment because it has a price tag. It's not cheap. In fact, I was shocked, and I should have said, initially that one of the main reasons I didn't take it for so long was because I couldn't afford to take it. So ideally, you will get your organization to support you in taking this exam as part of your professional development. I'll tell you what the price is in a second. But I also want to say that if you're a member of AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, you get a discount, about $200, $250, something like that. It's actually a significant discount. The exam is currently listed at $875 to apply. And once you apply and your application is approved, you have a window of opportunity, several months during which the exam testing is open. So for example, I took it in San Francisco, and I had to go to an actual testing center. And it was very interesting because I was taking the CFRE, and there were people taking people were taking Series 9, financial exams, and just everything under the sun. I probably had somebody taking a CPA exam too, I don't know. But it was very, very formal in terms of the presentation of, what you had to go through in the testing center. So just be prepared. I was actually a little bit surprised by all of the 2 forms of ID. But in any event, depending on where you live, that will be set up for you. Again, if you have an AFP membership or some other professional memberships, CFRE.org has a whole list of professional memberships that get you a discount on the exam. But this might be a good thing to say to your boss if you're in a fundraising shop. Hey, you know what? Next year, I really want to do this. Can we budget for this in my PD? Or can I talk to you about splitting the cost? Or whatever you feel like is appropriate. But organizations may do that for employees because they see it's a retention incentive, and also may actually help boost their credibility. So before, I'm kind of ready to go into some of the questions. I wanted to share some of those with you, but I wanted to ask, I guess there's just a couple of folks left, if anybody had any other questions before I actually got to the exam practice.
So I had one quick question. Would you recommend certification for all development staff or just perhaps top management?
That's a really good question. I think it would be absolutely amazing to be in a shop where all of the frontline fundraisers were CFREs. So not necessarily back office, but I think, again, it's, as in Karen's case, it's a really great professional development kind of incentive and experience. I think it'd be great for all frontline fundraisers, like all major gift officers, the chief development officer. Those are the folks where I would say, yeah, that would be an amazing place to sort of bring that kind of validity, credibility to the team. I think that'd be awesome. Is that helpful? So maybe not the whole team, but
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Yeah, maybe some of those key folks. Yeah, so I'm happy to give you some examples. You're going to have to unmute and kind of join me in this fun foray. Question number 1. I'm going to give you an easy, well, I think it's an easy one. It's short. If not easy, it's short. Here we go. CFRE practice question number 1. Which of the following is not considered a form of direct marketing to potential donors? All right, so what is not considered a form of direct marketing to potential donors? 1, telephone. 2, email. I should do this A, B, sorry. A, telephone. B, email. C, auction. Or D, newsletters. You could, I guess, type your answer, or you could open my, why don't you just tell me what you think?
I think it's C.
What do you think, Karen? Do you agree? Oh yeah, you said auction. Yeah, yeah, totally. You're both right. It is definitely, it's definitely auction. Okay, question number 2. A fundraising executive, a CFRE at a university, is looking for a means of ensuring ongoing, consistent fundraising. Which of the following would be the most effective option in this situation? So again, a fundraising executive at a university is looking for a means of ensuring ongoing, consistent fundraising. What do they want to do? Or what should they do? A, an endowment campaign. B, an alumni program. C, establish a nonprofit trust. Or D, create a legacy foundation.
What was the type of organization?
A university. And they want a means of ensuring ongoing, consistent fundraising.
I would say alumni.
Greg, how about you?
I'd probably say endowment.
The answer is alumni. They would establish an alumni program. And here's why. Because they want ongoing and consistent. The alumni program is ongoing and consistent year over year for as long as the university exists. An endowment campaign, the campaign itself is short term. Yes, the endowment return may be a sustaining form of income, but it's going to be limited. And the idea is that, I mean, well, limited. You can grow an endowment, but the idea is that the alumni program is going to give you a base, much like unrestricted operating revenue that you can count on for your budget year over year. So the answer is an alumni program. Does that make sense, Greg?
Oh yeah, yeah.
It totally does now. Okay, can we do a couple more? Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. Like I said, doing practice tests is the best way to pass this exam. All right, here's a little bit longer one. Question number 3, fundraising executives have a responsibility to make a solid case for an organization to those outside the organization, such as potential donors, right? We call it a case for support. We know that, both of you know that. Why should fundraising executives also make a compelling case to those who work within the organization? So A, to convince stockholders to donate to the organization as well. B, to ensure those within the organization understand its purpose. C, to secure a range of ongoing donation sources from employees. Or D, to assist in the process of profiling potential donors. What do you think?
Can you say the answers again, or not answers,
Yeah.
the choices again?
Yeah, of course, happy to. So A is to convince stockholders to donate. B is to ensure those within the organization understand its purpose. C is to secure a range of ongoing donation sources from the staff, the employees. And D is to assist in the process of profiling potential donors.
Wow, that's a good one.
Could you summarize the very beginning question that we're responding to?
So we have a responsibility as CFREs to make a solid case to those outside the organization, so donors, right? But why should a fundraising executive also make a compelling case to those who work in the organization?
I mean, I feel like this goes into culture of philanthropy that you're establishing within the organization, and I feel like B, C, and D sort of speak a little to that. So I almost want a multiple B, C, and D, but I feel a little wary about C, honestly, because depends on how much people are making, whether or not I feel like they should also contribute on a financial level. And I don't want to work for an organization that puts pressure on me to do that. So I think purpose B. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You should not try and, like you said, strong arm or whatever phrase you use, but you should not try to strong arm employees into making a donation.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really, really important to ensure that everybody in your organization understands why this organization, why now, how do we talk about the values and mission, and how do we speak about our beneficiaries, right? The case for this is really about ensuring that that culture of philanthropy is deepened in the organization, right? So internal explanation is absolutely as important as external. Is that helpful?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's do a couple more. Which of the following is especially important in reducing the overhead costs of running an organization? So this is about reducing overhead. How do we reduce overhead? Which of these, A, B, C, or D, is really important in reducing overhead costs? A, donors. B, individual skills. C, volunteers. D, government grants.
I forgot the letter, but I'm thinking first and foremost volunteers.
Karen, any thoughts?
Could you say it was donors? What was the second answer?
Donor, individual skills, like the individual skills of the people who work there.
Okay. Volunteers or government grants?
Right. The last one is government grants, right?
Okay. Reducing overhead.
So it's about, the question's about reducing overhead, right?
Yeah, I think volunteers then for reducing.
Yeah, you're both right. Right. So donors are going to increase income, right? Government grants are going to increase income. Skills may be excellent around employees and volunteers, but unless you know how those are going to be applied, it doesn't really help how that's going to, or tell us how that's going to reduce overhead. Like if you had, individual skills in, I don't know, finance, for example, and people were willing to volunteer those skill sets, maybe you would reduce overhead. But since you don't know that, yes, absolutely. And I think that ties into volunteers anyway. Okay, it's 1 o'clock. I'm happy to give you some more questions if you want, or I'm happy to answer just more general questions about the profession if that would be of service. I'm really open.
I actually did have one question in regards to something with our organization as well.
Sure.
So we have established that we're not requiring board members to provide because we think it kind of creates a pay-to-play atmosphere, and we don't want that. We'd rather have your expertise and service. But then I've come under the understanding that some foundations will not give to organizations whose board members don't donate.
That's true. Yeah.
So I'm curious, is there some kind of balance for that?
Yeah, no, I mean, no, there's no balance. You either do it or you don't. But let me ask a few questions. Or maybe I'll make them statements and then you can tell me kind of where you fit. So many small nonprofits do not require donations from board members because, as you said, they care about the expertise that those board members bring to the table. And in fact, the board is much more of an operating board rather than a governing board, meaning there are board members who are rolling up their sleeves to provide legal counsel or financial expertise and guidance or programmatic acumen, and you need that because you can't afford to hire an employee to do it, right? In that case, I would probably agree, you know what? Initially, or for, let's say, the next couple of years, I mean, depending on your strategic plan, right? This really is wedded to your strategic plan and the goals the organization has for itself. But, in the first few years, it may not at all be important for those board members to donate. Now you're going to cross a certain threshold where you need more revenue. Is it true that some foundations require there to be 100% board giving? Yes. Is it also true that there are some foundations who do not stipulate how much those board members need to give? Yes, all. There is not any foundation that I can think of that says board members must be giving this % of their income or X number of dollars. No, never. A board member could give you $1. It's a contribution. Right? And so all you have to do is say you have 100% board giving and you're able to back that up and you're fine. So it's a question about where you want to go. Certainly if you set, a mandate that board members must donate. Do that as part of your recruiting process. And also just be really clear that board service isn't just about that monetary donation, but there will be a point, I would say, in the organization's growth where it will become increasingly important that as building, as you're building that culture of philanthropy, that board members know that their contributions matter. So, I mean, there's more I could say about, give and get, and the idea of, how board members truly can fully participate in the success of an organization, of a nonprofit organization. But I hope that is helpful in your particular case, Greg.
Yeah, well, one thing as well is just realizing how damaging it can be of the image of a board member not supporting your organization in that way. I mean, even if they're volunteering their time and their expertise, they're not willing to give $5, that could say a lot more. Yeah,
sure, absolutely. I mean, it really comes down to why are they on the board? And that's an important question, why are they on the board? And then, going forward, what is the board that you want to be building for the organization? What do you need? And what do you eventually want to get to? So many a nonprofit has a board that they don't need. They have people who are there serving for sort of a bygone era when they needed their skills and expertise, but they haven't done enough to either term out board members or create plans to actually build in the kind of things that they need, usually fundraising going forward. Oh, but we don't have a fundraising board is the common lament in the nonprofit sector. Well, build one, right?
Yeah, I like to call those particular board members resume builders.
Yeah, if it doesn't serve, you need to know how to quote unquote fire them, right? You need to know how to get rid of them. Yeah, and hopefully, they know that too. Hopefully they're aware. So yeah, so I'm happy to be a resource. I think that if anyone now or in future, with whom you connect is interested in the CFRE, I'm happy to chat with them about it. Again, most of it comes down to your personal inclination. Sometimes it comes down to money. But if you've got 5 years in a seat as a fundraiser and are interested in deepening your professionalism and whatnot, then I definitely recommend it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Karen, did you have any other questions or comments?
I think that covers it. Thank you.
Yeah, this is greatly appreciated. This is something definitely I learned a lot more about the exam from.
Good.
Very appreciative of it.
Good. Thank you so much for having me. Really glad to have been with you.
All right. With that, thank you so much. We appreciate that. And have a good day, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.